Welcome to Mentoring Moments. Mentoring Moments is a sub-series of the E-Commerce Edge podcast. It is composed of clips taken from Jason's one-to-one and group mentorship sessions. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the E-Commerce Edge podcast with me, Jason Greenwood, your host. I have an incredible guest to introduce you to today that I have been following, I think, on LinkedIn for about 5 or 6 years with pretty religious fervor. Mr. Jonathan Briggs from Nimble, welcome to the podcast.
It's an honor to be here. Yeah, it's been at least that long. It spanned a couple of my career jumps, and so 25 is exciting that we've gotten to at least almost personally come together and have this. So thanks for having me.
My pleasure. I think of you almost like my logistics guru is kind of is where I would put you into sort of my orbit. You put out a lot of great content. You're a straight shooter. You call strikes and balls. You're a pretty prolific content creator. You jump into conversations around logistics. You have always contributed to the industry, not just e-commerce, but just commerce in general and all the conversations around how part and parcel logistics. I mean, we wouldn't have e-commerce. I mean, when I think of e-commerce today, I think of basically logistics with a pretty face. That's kind of what I think of e-commerce as today, because when they get goods out, you can't get them into your customers' hands in an efficient, effective way that allows you to make money in the process. So, you've been doing this for a long, long time. What drew you into this industry of logistics?
Well, what I just heard there was I'm old, so thank you for saying it so nicely. Candidly, it was an accident. You and I have talked about this. I was an exchange student to Mexico. You're now living there full time. I came back from being an exchange student and taught myself how to speak Spanish. And when I got back home, I wanted to be a translator, so I wouldn't lose the art of speaking Spanish that I spent a year learning. So I went to a job center probably a week after I got back as a 19-year-old kid and said, "Hey, I want to be a translator." And they looked at me sideways like, we don't have translators here. What are you talking about? But they're like, "If you're over 18, UPS is in the back if you want to go interview." All right, that sounds like a fun summer job, I thought to myself. So I slide on back. I interview with UPS. That put it all in motion. That was 7 years I worked with those guys from my senior year of high school through all of college and a little bit beyond. I started as an operator, first 6-ish years, loading and unloading trucks, washing trucks, managing everything from dispatch to route design and everything in between there, customer service, et cetera. And then got into sales and then realized I love sales, even though I fought going into sales. And then from there, that spans since 2005. I've been in logistics sales of some form or fashion, kind of 3 tranches with the parcel business, e-com and omni-channel fulfillment. And then now lately, a blend of all of it with technology, artificial intelligence, robotics, coupled with all of those other things. So here at Nimble, I sit here, an entire journey not wasted. Every single job, turn, twist, everything I've had along the way has come back to serve me very well as I lead our commercial team for selling both 3PL and robotic services. I head up strategy for customer facing technologies around warehouse management, order management, transportation management, and also head up our parcel strategy. So it is a full career that spanned starting in the late 90s all the way to here, that was a complete summer job accident. And now I'm just stuck. Like, I'm too far into this thing. And the good news is supply chain and logistics got really sexy, COVID and beyond, right? And now if you look at all the CEOs that are hired in the last 3 years, all former supply chain people. And so credit's starting to come where credit's due. And what's crazy is I did this through the school of hard knocks, right? Like, I'm a marketing major by background. And there may have been 2 or 3 schools in the late 90s, early 2000s that had supply chain and logistics. So it is very much the school of hard knocks, learning from the ground up, like I said, all the way starting to loading and unloading a trailer at UPS to now overseeing strategy in the space. So it's been a wild, wild, wild ride, and 25 looks to be wilder than it's ever been.
Wow, what a story. And it's interesting because we've led parallel lives in a way, but me in e-commerce, you in logistics. But I agree with you. I think I, for the first 3 quarters of my career, half to 3 quarters of my career, was heavily focused on B2C and D2C e-commerce, latterly got into B2B in a big, big way. And I feel like two things really happened during COVID. One is B2B, manufacturers, wholesalers, and distributors got digital religion during COVID because all of a sudden their field sales reps couldn't go out and knock on doors. They couldn't go and land new accounts. They couldn't go to their weekly coffee catch-ups. They couldn't take people to ball games. They couldn't do all the things that we know salespeople are really good at in terms of landing and expanding accounts. And all of a sudden they didn't have digital routes to market, and they went, holy shit, we're going to be out of business if we don't figure this digital thing out.
Yeah.
But they also got religion around logistics, and that was across the entire supply chain, and so buyers got religion around dual sourcing, dual shoring. They realized the danger of mono shoring, offshoring, both from a manufacturing perspective, the different freight lines that they worked with, the different carriers and shipping lines that they worked with, the different places where they sourced their shipping containers from were having problems. They couldn't get them out fast enough. And I just know, from the ANZ region where I was at when COVID hit, all the way to now in Mexico and working heavily with North American companies and European companies, supply chain, I tell you, people have like a trauma response when I talk to them about supply chain, even now. They have a trauma response when they start thinking about, I get heart palpitations when I think about the supply chain struggles we had during COVID. And it literally put a lot of businesses out of business. People that could not pivot, people that didn't have alternate supply chains, people that didn't have alternate contract manufacturers, people that didn't have alternate delivery mechanisms, and they couldn't shift. For example, if they had big, heavy machinery, they couldn't just shift from sea freight to air freight overnight. Whereas if you were supplying fashion, maybe you could shift some of your movements from sea freight to air freight to plug the gaps. But there were lots of industries that couldn't do that. And, I know that down in New Zealand during COVID, the price of getting a 20-foot container or 40-foot container from China into New Zealand, it quadrupled in the span of about 3 months, just the shipping cost alone. So this whole supply chain thing, I think everybody pre-COVID had this just-in-time model, just-in-time mindset, where they were expecting every link in the supply chain to effectively absorb some of their costs by holding inventory, no flooring costs associated with it, or expecting their manufacturers to hold certain inventory in stock for them. And the flaw in that was exposed massively during COVID. Did you experience that too?
Oh, absolutely. And I was, in my nascency of being in the fulfillment and 3PL space at that time, and was fortunate enough, a few weeks before it was not fortunate enough, but fortunate when it happened to have lots of empty buildings that we put up in our network to, if we build it, they will come. Well, they came fast in March of 2020, and it went from conversations that took 6 to 9 months plus, took 6 to 9 minutes, it felt like. And it was like, basically the questions for qualification were, do you have space and how soon can we start, right? Like that was, because there were states in the US that were being completely shut down. You could not go to work. You're not essential enough to go to the office. And so there were states that were essential, and we happen to operate lots of fulfillment centers in those. So yes, absolutely. We saw everything. Now the flip side has happened is everybody went coming out of there when supply chains kind of, after the bullwhip effect and flattened back out, was, I'm never going to miss a sale again, right? So then it was, we're going to carry decades worth of inventory. And at the same time, sales did this, which is 2022, we saw that. And now, like, there's some balance that's kind of needs to happen, like maybe not just in time, but also never miss out on a sale again, because especially when you outsource your supply chain, there is a carrying cost that is real. Every month you're getting charged some type of square foot, unit, whatever, pallet, whatever unit of measure is different, but it costs you. Versus like when I talk to operators that run their own supply chain or their own warehouse, they're like, my building rent is the same. So if I let 10,000 extra pallets sit around and I don't have to expand, then I'm okay. So my cost really is a fixed cost, and it doesn't matter. When you outsource, it compounds, and we're charging you a transactional fee. And then we're probably after several months charging you an increased transactional fee because we're not in the storage business, we're in the transactions business. And now all of a sudden, if everybody is bloating their inventory because sales are down and I'm never going to miss a sale mentality happens, now I as an operator have to build new buildings without generating new activity against it. And so it is kind of creating a challenge in the unit economic space for both the brands and the 3PLs that support them if they don't have a real good balancing act of like how much inventory should I have on hand. And it's funny you said like everybody like really got good religion around what supply chain should look like. I think they forgot about it for about 18 months. And we're seeing it now with 2025 or tail into 24, like we see what happened in Mexico, where all of a sudden, if you're flowing through Mexico to come back to the U.S. to circumvent duties and taxes, not so fast. Or if you're now the tariff conversations that we still don't know where they're going to go, but they're going somewhere, and they're heavily tilted, at least for the short term, and pointed directly at China. So if I'm a China sourcer, should I have another country in my portfolio? Probably. Should I nearshore and put something up in Mexico? Right. These are probably conversations you're having with some of your customers you support. And so some of the things that we learned very expensively in 21-ish, 22 that we forgot about a couple years later are now all full circle again. So it's interesting that we're back to we might have the wrong supplier strategy. Maybe we might have the wrong market of fulfillment strategy, et cetera. So it feels a little bit like March of 2020 in some of my conversations again around what's happening, say, in Mexico and the pressure on importing into the U.S. and tariffs that is a big sledgehammer right now in the current administration. So it'll be interesting to see how this shapes up.
And I'd love to get your take on what you have seen over the last, say, 10, 15 years in the evolution of the mentality around logistics for brands from startup all the way to scale up. And what I mean by that is that we have standardized now, at least in the B2C and D2C world, there's kind of these standard design patterns, at least from a tech stack perspective. Maybe when you're a startup, maybe you start up with Shopify and you start out with Klaviyo and you start out with QuickBooks, for example. Okay, cool. Then maybe your next level of growth, you go from QuickBooks to NetSuite in the back end. And then when you outgrow Klaviyo and you put in a CDP, and then you outgrow Shopify as your PIM and you put in a PIM system that then connects to Shopify and puts out data to all these different systems. So there's kind of these phases of growth and these kind of standardized rubber stamp design patterns that, largely are followed across our industry and have proven to work really, really well as you scale and grow and are cost effective, right? And I've seen a similar transition happen in the mindset really, really well for us. If we had doubled or tripled in size, we either had to do one of two things. We either have to move to a much larger warehouse, or we would have had to move everything over to a 3PL or some combination of the two, where we said, okay, cool, certain orders are going to go to the 3PL, certain orders are going to come to us, and we'll do some order orchestration, some order routing to make that happen in our ERP. And I feel like the industry goes through phases again where everybody says, nah, you got to outsource to a 3PL because they can do everything way more efficiently than you can. They've got the WMS, they've got the OMS, they've got the order orchestration. They can fulfill to your social commerce orders. They can fulfill your marketplace orders. They can fulfill your D2C orders and everything in between, going from individual parcels, cartons, pallets, and containers, and everything in between. A 3PL can do that for you. You'll never be able to build that capability yourself in any kind of a cost-effective way. And then the market seems to at other times shift the other way and say, you need to be in control of your own destiny. You need to be in control of the pick, pack, dispatch process, where you can put all the inserts in there. You give the high level of customer service. You control where your order routing is for the day. WMS software is cheaper than it's ever been with PeopleVox and other providers. So I feel, again, similar to how we think about offshoring versus nearshoring versus onshoring, I feel like the industry goes through a revolution every few years where the gurus go from telling you outsource everything, and then a couple of years later they're telling you, no, you need to own your own destiny and have your own pick, pack, dispatch process that you own end to end. Have you seen that too?
Yeah, so it's insource versus outsource, right? We have that conversation a lot, and I would say right now, outsourcing is in vogue again. It's very cool to be in the 3PL business. And there's a couple of things that are happening that are pushing more and more towards at least some combination of outsourcing. Maybe it's I own part of my network and I outsource some of the other things. Is there's a few things. One, technology rate of change is insane right now. I mean, even us as an AI manufacturer of robots and an AI developer, when we deploy something, it's already like out of date, right? Like there's already something in development coming again. And so the cost of deploying new automation, new softwares, and how often you have to do that is very challenging. Running operations is really hard. I don't know if anybody told you this or not. Like it's really hard and it's only getting harder, right? Like managing people on an hourly work level that has, and especially if you have a lot of direct consumer, you know this, the distribution patterns look like this in terms of order drops and volumes. And so, Wednesday and Thursday in the warehouse is different than Sunday and Monday in the warehouse, right? Like, and so how do you staff for that? And when you've got people that are like, hey, I want to balance my work and home life, and I want to have predictable schedules, and I want 40 hours in my benefits this week. Like that makes challenging. And so then you're like, okay, I've got to outsource, even though I'm running my own warehouse, I've got to outsource my labor to a third party because I need flex labor to handle all this ups and downs. And I'm constantly turning over and training new people. And then the other thing is this is why I'm in robotics, right? This is why I left traditional warehousing into robotics, is because the people that want to do that type of work are getting less and less each year. They're aging out. And this is the first generation that 18 to 25 is not coming behind to the rescue to help bail out the aging workforce. And so now you've got aging workforce and then nobody's coming behind it. And so you have each year we have a smaller and smaller pool of lower and lower quality and higher price point to do that. And that gets really hard to manage. And so that's those two things coupled with cost of capital right now is really high. Like gone is the free
Free money
cash that
days.
they're gone. And we're seeing sevens and eights and nines and plus percent interest rates in a B2B environment. And so do I tie up $150 million of CapEx to launch a new warehouse? Or do I spread that out with a 3PL that's going to maybe own some of that and amortize it across the 7-year period and then deal with all the ups and downs? So that's another component. I think the fourth thing is the US is a really big landmass, and transportation has gotten very expensive, and consumer expectations around reliability, visibility, and speed to the doorstep has gotten somewhat insane. Like,
Insane.
yeah,
Yeah, insane.
yeah.
That's the
I'm
word I'd
glad I
use.
said it because you were thinking
Yeah.
it, but it got insane. And so now, gone are the days of 1999 e-commerce logistics of put something in Indianapolis, Indiana, or Kansas, or
Miami,
Ohio,
LA.
whatever, and spread it 3 days to the east and 3 days to the west, and that's okay because that's not now you've got to be very predictable, very reliable. And so now we're seeing distributed inventory management happen and people running multiple locations. And so now it's one thing to run, like you're talking about, my warehouse is also my corporate office. Oh, but what happens when your warehouse is not your corporate office and I have a decentralized workforce and a decentralized labor team? And how do I keep the same standard at corporate that I do in my regional field offices? That's really hard. And so what we do see is like what you talk about is big operators that have their corporate office keep that central location as a hub and then start forward deploying fast moving inventory and partner with 3PLs to manage that. So I get out of the CapEx game, I get out of the managing decentralized workforces, I don't have to worry about all the standardization. So right now I'm seeing more and more people sign up in some form or fashion for 3PL than we were seeing, pre-COVID. And I think that there's, as long as the industry can create more value and create more reliability and add scalability to it without suffocating the brands with cost and complexity and also perform and execute on it, then I think that's going to be where we see brands pull back usually is the same reason we see a lot of times married people that go through divorce don't remarry again, is if you have a bad experience,
Once
why
bitten,
would I
twice
want to
shy.
sign up for another one, right? And so we usually see somebody going through, they've chose the wrong partner, they have the wrong provider of choice, and so their thought process, well, we chose the best at the time, and this was as good as it got, so now we have to insource it. And so we do see some of that, but then they go through a while and be like, they start remembering
This
the
is
good
harder than we
times.
thought.
Yeah, yeah,
This
exactly.
is
Like,
harder
oh
than it
yeah,
seemed.
yeah. So there's always some people that do, I think the reality is, of some of the commentary you talked about in our earlier comments, discussions, whatever, is that there's always going to be people that see supply chain as a differentiator, right? So like an Amazon, a Target, a Walmart. Yes, they have partners along the way, but most of it's owned, right? And
Yeah.
and, and so if you are in that type of business where you created a differentiator and then also something catastrophic comes up again, you're in the driver's seat if you own it. And
Yeah.
so there are definitely things to do. And then as are arguments that can be made to insourcing it. And if you also think about all of this new automation that's coming out, and hardware and robotics and software and artificial intelligence, and we can run buildings that are less reliant on people, or like uh, you have tens, maybe hundreds of people versus thousands of people in a warehouse, that gets really interesting. And so now I can justify capital investment, and I can justify running my own operation, doing it my way, because I should be able to sweat this asset that's now my hardware stack and my software stack and really push it. And so now, instead of getting a year over year rate increase from a provider, I should be able to drive costs down year over year, and lower my OpEx, or my operating cost per unit, each year that goes by, because I'm amortizing against this initial CapEx that I did. So as the automation improves, I do think this will drive people to back into insourcing a little bit more.
I think you raise a really good point that a lot of startup operators aren't necessarily thinking about from day one, but they probably need to start thinking about it sooner than they do, or sooner than they would, given that order orchestration and distributed order management are the order of the day. And being able to have a flexibility around fulfillment modes becomes massively important. It's not just the fact that you want to build resiliency into your supply chain, but it's also important to leverage, as you point out, the assets in your network that you already have. So for example, if I got 15 physical stores in my store estate, and I want to allow BOPIS, or in the B2B world, will call, I want to fulfill from store inventory, particularly if it's close and I've got everything in inventory for a specific order. I want to self-fulfill if let's say I've got an office, headquarters, and a warehouse on the West Coast. Then maybe I want to fulfill everything on the West Coast directly. But for everything else from Midwest East, I want 3PL order routing to happen, and those to be fulfilled from those nearest locations, or to automatically orchestrate a stock transfer to that central location where I can fulfill the entire order from that location, or I split ship depending on what's best for the customer experience and best for my cost base. But that requires very sophisticated order orchestration software, even if somebody employs somebody like you. So I guess if they outsourced 100% of it to somebody like you, that's great. But still, that's not going to incorporate store estate fulfillment, BOPIS, etc. Maybe will call. You can correct me if I'm wrong. You guys may be able to facilitate will call in certain scenarios. But I think most brands underestimate the flexibility they need to have in their fulfillment strategies at different points in time in their business growth and scaling.
Well, you're spot on, right? Whatever you want to call it, omni-channel, unified commerce, selective distribution, whoever you talk to has a different name for it. I saw Shopify walk it back at the show. We want to be in where our customer wants us to be, right? So they're not full, be everywhere, but be everywhere your customer is. But anyway, yes, flexibility is really critical. And those things are mattering more and more as transportation goes up and up, right? And also as speed goes up and up. And here's one other thing, and I'd be curious to get your take on this, because I think this really falls in your domain, is sourcing of the order at the shopping cart level versus post checkout is changing people's supply chain and distribution strategies quite a bit. So what I mean by that is, if I don't know where the product sits in relative to where the customer is buying it or wants it delivered to, then I just have to have this generic statement of service, cost, time, blah, 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 right? But if I know upfront that Jonathan is in Ohio and I have a unit in Ohio, I could show him that if he checks out in the next 45 minutes, he could have it same day delivered. He could have it same day picked up, whatever the case may be. But if I don't do that, the best case I can show somebody is next day at a much higher cost. And so the legacy tech platforms are failing everybody because 99.9% of the people are order sourcing post checkout and do not have a dynamic cart. And so therefore, this is why same day delivery, same day pickup has not taken off the way it should, even though the consumer expectation is there, is because I don't want to tell Jonathan he could have it today in Ohio if I find out on the back end the unit's in California because I can't get it there same day, right? I'm not flying the Musk shuttle from California yet, right? So
or the Hyperloop.
Yeah, exactly. Something we're going underground, above ground, however we get it there. And so be curious what conversations you're having, and do you see a fix for that?
Yes. And that's why technologies like Pretty Damn Quick and their equivalents are starting to really become a hot topic of conversation. In fact, Pretty Damn Quick, they announced that team, they announced, I think, a $20 million, I could be wrong on this, massive VC investment into their technology, and some of their complementary players or competitors in the marketplace have announced recent investments, because up until very recently, personal of every part of the customer journey in e-commerce except for checkout was the norm. Yeah. So search, merch, personalization, voice tech, everything else. And even from a customer service perspective, automation with Gorgeous and other technologies like that, and personalization at that level, and personalization through loyalty and membership programs. Personalization was the absolute norm except when you got to the checkout. That was the one area that was never ever personalized, because, hey, here's my freight matrix, or here's my shipping rates matrix. Here's where I can ship from. Here's where I can ship to. Here's how much it's going to cost me. And here's the options I'm going to give. And they were all pretty fixed based on some fixed rules, right? Now, technologies like Pretty Damn Quick personalize the checkout experience, particularly in relation to freight. So we now know that not every customer wants next day delivery. Some do, and some are willing to pay for it. But some are willing to wait a week because I'm buying a ball gown, or my wife's buying a ball gown, for example, for something that's going to for an event that's going to happen in a month. So I don't care whether it takes me. I definitely don't need that. My wife does not need that overnight. She can wait a week. She can wait 2 weeks for a consolidated shipment or an LTL shipment or something like that, right? Whereas, some customers, no, I freaking got that ball tomorrow. I need that freaking ball dress like same day delivery if possible. And I will pay, I'll pay double the price of the item just to get it to me in time, right?
Yeah.
So I guess what Pretty Damn time, they're making calls to the carriers in real time. They're making calls to the 3PLs in real time. And they're basically putting together a real-time matrix of options for the customer for that specific cart composition, origination, and destination.
And at that moment in time.
In that moment in time.
Yeah.
And that is where I think the whole entire e-commerce world. So Amazon's been doing that forever. But the small mom and pop shops, impossible. The tech was just way too immature. It was way too expensive. So unless you were, a Macy's or something like that, you would not be able to afford that kind of technology. But
even the big ones that could afford it weren't even doing it.
Which is blows my mind, but absolutely blows my mind. And so, to your point, I think you've absolutely hit the nail on the head. Customers are demanding different things. They're willing to pay different prices for it. And just like we want to give them multiple payment method options, but not overwhelm them with payment method options, we want to do the exact same thing with all of their freighting and collection options.
Correct. Yeah, because here's the thing is, it's probably about the most expensive component of the process.
Exactly.
It's also one of the top 2 reasons for cart abandonment or order conversion, however you want to measure it. And so, because you're right, like if I'm in that ball gown situation and I've got the event today, tomorrow, I can't get it. Best is tomorrow by end of day. I'm going to a store. But if you tell me if I order in the next 15 minutes, I can have it in the next 3 hours, boom, converted. Yeah. And you're right, at a premium because it mattered to me. because I
Correct.
needed it. And that's the other thing is, and I've had this conversation. I don't know if you follow Nate Skyver at all, but he and I
Yes.
have had this conversation a ton with a similar example around Christmas. Not every December order needs to be delivered by the 25th, right?
No,
And
that's right.
so if why over and but you see brand after brand do this step down matrix that if it's on the 18th, I upgrade it to 3-day. If it's on the 19th, I upgrade it to 2-day, blah, blah, blah. For somebody that just bought it because they wanted it and it was on sale. And so I like what you're talking about of actually having the opportunity to slow something down. And I think brands that slow it down with some type of credit or
Incentive,
discount,
basically.
yeah, say, you know what? Hey, Jonathan, you just saved me $15 by delaying this a week. I'll give you 5 back. Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so I think if you did that, several things can happen. You can flatten out your peaks a little bit. And so it's not all whoop, right. So we can extend that peak period a little bit longer. We can maybe avoid some overstaffing and flex labor and overtime work. And we can mode optimize in the transportation level drastically. So that to me, there's so much profitability and revenue sitting in that one little metric. It's mind blowing. And so glad to hear, because I've never heard of the PDQ or Pretty Damn Quick before. So I'm glad to hear that. I've been seeing it with a brand or a company called Phoenix Commerce, Fenix.
Yes, I
They
know. I had them on my podcast. Doing
great,
great work.
great guys. Yeah, so very similar. So I like what they're doing. And that's the unlock, but it's these old legacy systems with old OMSs that say, we're not going to worry about where the units are until the order is taken. Bad move.
Until it hits our ERP.
Yep.
Ridiculous.
Bad move. So good to hear that you're here, that one, there's solutions out there to solving it. And two, better yet, brands are actually talking to you about implementing them. So that's exciting.
And I'd like to get your take on 3PL effectively being the equivalent of multi-tenant SaaS software of the fulfillment world. Now, what I mean by that is, in the old days of software technology, we had on-premise technology. We had the Magentos of the world. We had the SAPs of the world. We had we had all on-premise technology. We had our own server rooms. I remember in our offices, we had a server room and we had all of our own software. And then those workloads, those self-hosted workloads would move to the public cloud, but they were still self-hosted architecture. And basically, I had to upscale my infrastructure to handle my peaks and troughs of my workload. So if I had a massive peak and I needed to care for that massive peak, for 3 months of the year, well, then maybe I needed to have a server that could handle those peaks, but then I was paying for it the other 9 months of the year when I didn't need it. Then we moved to virtualized environments, and that could auto scale, right? But then the world got religion about multi-tenant SaaS, where now we can amortize these infrastructure costs across every single user of that software. We're just going to consume it through a browser like the Shopify's of the world, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think of 3PL in a very similar way, because if I own my own warehouse and I've got to try to staff for peaks and troughs, and then I've got to try to get part-time people in for the peaks, and then I lay them off during the troughs, but then I need a minimum level of staffing, regardless of how much business that we do, to keep the warehouse running and do the receipting, and then I got to have systems for chaotic put away, so I'm making use of every square foot of space that I possibly can. Then I got to put a carouseling system in to get it from the back of the warehouse to the front of the warehouse. I got to have my pick, pack, dispatch stations, regardless of how much business I'm doing. I've got to have a WMS so that I can do my pick segmentation and all that sort of stuff. And that's regardless of the level of business that I'm doing. Maybe in the start, I don't have a WMS, but I have a manual pick, pack, dispatch process, but at least I've got a carrier aggregation platform where I can manage my label printing and consignment lodgement. But the beauty of a 3PL, as I see it, is effectively now, instead of me having to resource 100% of my infrastructure, now you, for example, as a 3PL, might have 10 businesses or 20 businesses operating out of your warehouse, where my peaks might be December and January, their peaks might be February through April, and the other guy's peaks might be, May through the end of the year, for example. And so it allows you to amortize your costs across all of the freight movements that you're managing on behalf of multiple businesses and multiple business models. Whereas me, with my own single warehouse, I got to staff and I've got to up resource and I got to have the technology to manage whatever order comes my way. And it feels like kind of almost like a 3PL is like the SaaS version of fulfillment.
Well, I think you're in a lot of ways you're spot on, right? And typically, for middle market brand, it's going to be some type of an OpEx play, right? It's transactional. I'm going to, charge you to receive it, to store it, to pick it, to pack it at some type of, unit economic that makes sense. And so as volume goes down, my costs naturally go down.
Yes.
The opposite of that is true. As my volume goes up, and so do my costs. But
Mhm.
because here's the other issue I always talk about with brands is just like your example, you have to have something for 52 weeks, even though you may only use it for 6 weeks out of the year. And you can't just do pop-ups and be like, I'm going to turn on a
Yeah.
node for 6 weeks. That's not going to happen. Nobody's taking on your business to do that, right? And you want somebody that's used to your business year round, even if it's in a smaller amount, to scale up versus only do business 6 weeks out of the year. It's just not a great recipe for success. So I agree with all those things, right? Because overhead of the business, like if you think about it, like just X's and O's, right? Like I've got rent amortized. I have a general manager or operations management team that's now, to your point, spread across 10 or 15 brands instead of just my one brand. Like I'm probably about the same pay grade for my ops leader as you are for yours, but he's now managing 20 brands. So again, that fixed overhead gets spread out. The software is, or in my case, the artificial intelligence, the robots, the hardware, all this stuff spread across everybody in the building. And so absolutely, because you can do that. And then you also have the ability to, like you said, of offset the peaks and valleys, because we've got summer brands and we've got winter brands and we've got, these like subscription models that are like steady Eddie every month. And so we can pop those up, we can pop those down, and so you're absolutely right. Like it blows me away. I talk to brands that run their own warehouse, and they're like, yes, 48 weeks or so. It's a 5-day a week operation, and then 4 weeks out of the year, I'm running second and third shift, and I'm on the weekends, and I don't see my family for a month at a time, but I wind it back down. And so there is a lot of that. I also think like not only the rate of change in technology, there's also a rate of change in the transportation world that the average person just cannot keep up with or know what to do with. Or do I have the volume on my own to do different strategy than somebody that has the volume of 20 or 30 or 50 or 100 other brands? And so that to me, like we always talk about, like I could give fulfillment away for free and still not be the provider of choice if my transportation strategy is wrong, right? Because about 60 to 70 cents of every dollar spent through me for my customers is paying for transportation. It is by
Yes.
far the biggest expense they have. So we've got to be like laser focused with transportation. We have to have all that aggregate volume to be able to do creative things, have the technology to keep up with. I mean, just this year alone, the amount of change that's happened. We've had 4 carriers go out of business since August of 2024. We've had the USPS basically get rid of
Oh,
their work share program. That
yes.
that all went into effect last Sunday or a week ago Sunday. So now, entering product at the last local mile post office is no longer a thing. Or if you do, we're not going to give you money savings to do it.
Just racked up the rates.
Everybody's ready. We're now paying. Think about it. The word peak surcharge got changed in 24 to demand surcharge, so we can charge it whenever we feel like it.
Yes.
And we're now in January, and we just came off of demand surcharges.
Yes.
Peak's been
Yeah.
over for weeks now.
Yes.
And,
Yes.
and
Well,
so
they're
all
moving
of
to the
those
Uber
things.
model, right? They're
Yes.
moving to congestion pricing at 24-hour a day congestion pricing.
And so now, if you think about in that example, it's exactly that, right? We don't want to have fixed rates. We want to have, so like, here's a perfect example. February 14th is coming up, right? So
Yeah.
Valentine's, we're going to do that.
Gotta go through the
Mother's
roof.
Day, ramp it up. So we're going to have like a demand event every month now that
Yes.
we can have this different rate, even though we have these fixed contracts that are no longer fixed. And so so all of that to say, if I'm an average operator I'm a brand and I just throw some bodies at operations, you're going to get run over by that snowball so fast. And so sometimes it's the same thing, right? And you probably get this joke better than anybody, being a consultant. It's like people get mad when you send them the bill and it's
Yeah.
like, whoa, like give me, I want like
Shock.
the cartoon, right, of the guy like hitting the hammer on the nail, and it's like $5 for the hammer, $1,000, and they're like, and it's like you're paying for the knowledge of knowing where to hit the hammer, right? Like,
Yes. Yes.
and so there is value, and I think that comes when you find the right partners in the 3PL space that understand all of those nuances of technology, of fulfillment, of transportation, of technology, et cetera, dovetails all together and is constantly keeping up with the rate of change because they have dedicated teams and resources to each and all of those things. That even if that comes at a premium, it still has a cost savings because you're avoiding the risk of all of a sudden my only carrier was one of those four carriers that went out of business in last August or in the last 6 months. Then what would I do, right? But if we knew it was coming and we had seven other carriers, and when they went away, our all of our volume just shifted, and it was like a blip. Or if say a strike were to happen, or whatever event happens that causes somebody to not be able to do business one day, I've got six other carriers. We just route it to somebody else. And so things like that I don't think people, and obviously if you have a lot of volume, that's like this, I'm not talking about the big guys we talked about, but the mid-market, probably $250 million top line brand and below does not have enough of volume resources or whatever to be able to offset that. And that's really the value in that 3PL model. Why you would outsource is for expertise and all of those things that somebody can watch the trends and keep up with it and be able to give you guidance all along the way.
I think where another area where this becomes an acute challenge is for brands, for example, furniture and home furnishings brands, for example. So I'm shipping everything from a table runner to a pillow to a lounge suite, right? And so, my lounge suite, I'm going to have to ship that with a bulk carrier. There's just no two ways about that. I'm not going to be shipping that. I'm not going to be shipping that with a small local carrier, right?
No.
Or even a middle mile carrier. It's got to be a bulk haulage carrier, right?
Yep.
Now, what I've discovered is that the vast majority of the bulk haulage carriers, even the regional ones in particular, they don't even have APIs to connect to. So you got to be dropping a CSV file onto an SFTP server that then they somehow pick up and they get it into their system. They processes it as a CSV file. They send out the bulk haulage truck, and it comes and picks it up, and then they send it out, and then they dump a CSV of their shipments back onto the same SFTP server. And you got to pick that back up again so you can even have your tracking details. They are not a FedEx. They are not a UPS. They are not a USPS. They are oftentimes small, local, family-owned bulk haulage carriers with 5 big-ass trucks. And they don't have the technology. They got the resources, they got the people, they got the hardware, the trucks, and they got the drivers, but they're not necessarily uber tech savvy on the back end about how they receive their consignments and how they send out the data around the fulfillments, right? And so when we have mixed mode shipping that is required for a brand, or if they're a B2B brand in particular, and they have a combination of container loads, half truck loads, LTL loads, small aggregated loads, consolidated freight, like the number of modes that B2Bs oftentimes need to be able to ship in is phenomenal, right? All the way from a small satchel all the way up to a freaking 40-foot high cube container and everything in between, right? And so I think one of the other benefits, and I'm sure you'll correct me if I'm wrong here, one of the other benefits of a 3PL is that the carriers that they have to integrate with just as a part of their day job from a system and operational perspective means that they will oftentimes have access to carriers you would never have access to as an individual business. Second of all, they will oftentimes get better rates than you, even if you moved all of your, say, satchel freight from FedEx to UPS. And even if that was on the table and you were negotiating based on that expectation, oftentimes the 3PL is still going to get a better rate than you that they can extend to you as a business than you could ever get on your own, because the volume that 3PL is doing through those carriers is orders of magnitude larger than you will ever do with them.
Yeah, I mean, you're spot on. All I could think of when you were describing that insane tech layer was like 1999 just called and wanted their tech stack back when you were talking about SFTP, CSVs, flat files, like my mind just hurt listening to all of that stuff in the age of API. But you're right. And the other thing too is the integrations, right? Like you were talking about is, we've got tech stacks that are pre-integrated with hundreds, if not thousands of carriers that we can, because not all of those things, like when you talk about a diversity, like you just said right there, like some of those shipments might only come up once a week or once a month. Like and it's like a one-off. You're like, oh, what do I do? And it's like, oh, we just hit this button and dial up that and call somebody in. So it helps versus if you were doing your own and you're using the carrier's software and you've got to go one by one by one by one, like it would be a nightmare to keep up with all of those things. So there, there's so many reasons and use cases, and it really simply boils down to transportation and technology and cost amortization across a larger group, or a reverse like scale, right? Like if I take your 100,000 orders with 10 other people's 100,000 orders and put them down in the same warehouse, think of the magnitude just happened in there. So it does create a scaling effect that you won't reach on your own for a long time to come.
And within Nimble, are you guys intending, or do you already, because all transparency, I've never worked with your company before, is it your intention to kind of keep all of your automation, your software, your hardware, your robotics? Is the idea to bring more value to your 3PL customers through that technology, or is it your vision to ultimately be able to white label or resell the hardware technology and the underlying operating system to drive that to other 3PLs that can leverage your technology to make them more efficient too? Or is this, no, this is our secret sauce and we're holding on to it?
No, great question. So there's two components to it. One is, or I guess maybe just take a step back. One, we're on this end-to-end autonomous supply chain journey. That's our vision. We want to be an end-to-end autonomous supply chain company. So we're not just one little island of automation within the cog of us. What we typically see over the last decade or more, most warehouse automation, robotics, et cetera, looked at one little problem in the warehouse and said, that's manual, I'm going to fix it. And then do that 10, 11 times over with 10 or 11 other providers. We're trying to make an end-to-end hardware stack that would take us from dock door inbound through dock door outbound and everything in between. What we've solved today in there is from the time we put a product away to a sellable inventory location through outbound shipping, we can do that without people being involved with that process. So we can put it away, I can pick it, I can pack it, and I can sort it to a carrier or a sort level before people have to re-engage with it at our current state. Now, we're going to continue to go basically where we started at the lowest hanging fruit of what's the biggest headache in the warehouse, that's picking. And
Yes.
then what's the next bit? That's packing. And then we're going down that list, right? So we'll eventually get to where we do that end to end. And then there's even scenarios where I will do things that are outside of the four walls. That's why we call it end to end. So robotics in a truck,
Yep.
autonomous vehicles, like, so that's
Pallet movements into
all of
vehicles,
that
off
stuff.
vehicles.
All of that stuff. So that's a little bit of the story or the history of it. Now, as today, we are vertically integrated 3PL, where I'm the hardware manufacturer, the systems and software developer of all of our systems, all the way through the artificial intelligence, and we're the first party operator of our own network of 3 locations across the U.S. Yep, and then we'll continue to scale and add more locations. Now, we're in a pivot. We're not in a pivot. We're in a divide where we're going to split my sales team, and we're going to have focus on selling brands that want to go into our warehouses and take advantage of all of this stuff without capex, and come into an opex environment that's optimized for the next decade or more and way ahead of the curve, because we've created automated storage and retrieval systems that redesign the warehouse. All positionless inventory, no racks, no aisles, and I work vertically in all my buildings. So I am maximizing the cubic foot of the building, not just the square foot of the building, and I'm optimizing for people. So it's a very unique, situation.
No locations, all that stuff.
All that stuff. And so what's beautiful is like any day of the week, I can reposition the warehouse without having a single person being involved with it. I can put the fast movers where they're supposed to be, and then when they're not fast movers, they'll naturally go where they're not supposed, or they should go, and I'll put a new set of fast movers in place of it. Versus today, in a fixed position warehouse, you either pay somebody to move it, or you walk past it, and now you're less productive and you're more expensive in your picking paths, right? And so, yes, we still are very much a 3PL. And then when I say this divide, or where we're splitting the sales team's focus, is we're now at a point where we've polished up the machine and got enough data and got enough comfort level that we're in the process of selling that system to other people not named Nimble. But the asterisk or the gotcha is that's to other brands that run their own warehouse and not to other 3PLs. We still want the 3PL secret sauce for us. And then the big brands that say, I don't ever do anything with 3PLs. I'm going to always insource. We're going to help them with their digital transformation journey and redesign their whole warehouse around this, people light warehouse that has fewer people in it and much smaller footprints. And so instead of needing a million square foot facility, I can maybe shrink that down to 300,000 square feet and get the same throughput, same storage capacity, and do that with a fraction of the head count. And let's redesign your whole thing. Now I can also augment my 3PL network with their own network and be on the same tech stack, the same hardware. And for folks that aren't sure, they can start in the 3PL environment, test out the systems without the CapEx, make sure that it works for them, and then we can deploy it in their system. Because what happens today in the robotics space is people are making $50, $100 million CapEx decisions with a digital strategy, basically creating this in a simulator that's an AI tool that is a digital twin of a warehouse. And they put in a bunch of data inputs and hope the data inputs are right. And they say, look at us. We can save you, X number of cents an hour and this many people, theoretically. But you can't try it before you buy. And so you say, okay, the model looks great. Let's sign up. I'll drop $50 million and, let's build this thing over the next 18 months or whatever. And in our world, to say, hey, yeah, I've got simulators. I can build simulators, but we can also just put it right in the warehouse today and let's start picking and packing for you. Let's optimize maybe you only have something in, say, Columbus, Ohio. Go ahead and use my California facility. We can give you another node. But the main journey here is about figuring out if we have the right software and hardware stack for you to put in your own warehouse in the future. And meanwhile, I'm gonna optimize the West Coast for you. I'm going to reduce your speed or improve speed to customer, reduce your cost per customer for those West Coast orders, and help also give you a relief valve in peak because you can send more volume to my warehouse, et cetera. That's how we approach it. So that it's a hybrid of what you were saying is I still want the secret sauce as a 3PL, but for those that aren't going to go the 3PL route, I want to give them in their warehouse the opportunity to look and feel like my warehouse.
Wow, what a bold vision. And look, I know exactly what challenge you're solving for because I have had to implement warehouse automation as a brand before.
Yep.
And I tell you, there's the WMS software, but then we had to engage like 5 different hardware vendors over and above the WMS vendor. We had to have the scanning guns, we had to have the carouseling engines, we had to have the picking and packing stations, the packing and dispatch stations. We had to have the move to the sort area with the sorting cages and everything else. The amount of vendors that we were engaging with was insane. And then we had to do all of the architectural road mapping of getting those systems integrated and sharing data with each other. And most of it was XML based. And there was a lot of work that went on to get all that stuff. And then we had to, deal with, forklifts and all sorts of other technology to get to the rafters. And it was, then you have gantry systems and you've got it's pretty phenomenal when you think about the full scale solution or the full scale challenge that you solve for, instead of me having to now engage with a warehouse designer, hardware developer, software developer, system integrators. Like if I can kind of come to you and I can have a mostly turnkey solution from a software hardware perspective, well, this is a you have moved away from selling point solutions or not. You've moved away from selling SKUs to solutions, and that to me feels like a really important thing.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because what you just described, we call warehouse as a service. And I've got a nice muscle that we've built, right? I've built 3 of my own. I'm in the process of adding 2 more to the network this year. So we do it end to end. I've got in-house solutioning, in-house engineering. I've got hundreds of software and hardware people in the business. And so what we'll do is collaborate with our brands. We will operate and act as the integrator, the developer, the manufacturer, the construction team. All of those layers of complexity, guess what, is also cost, is also time delays, it's finger pointing. We're going to say, hey, it's exactly, you hit the nail on the head. It's a turnkey solution, one throat to choke the whole way, with a team that has already been doing it warehouse after warehouse and knows how to do it. And then we will bring it up online, get it working, and then one of two things: either turn it over to you and you run it, and then we will support you on the software side and the maintenance side, or I can actually do a managed services of that, and I can operate it as an operator with an OpEx, and I'll charge you a unit rate, and so it's kind of like an in-source 3PL, but you own it. So it
Yes.
just depends on what you want to do, because we also are operators. We know how to staff and scale a building, or we also know how to construct them. So exactly, that's why we are going down the pathway that we're on of warehouse as a service, is exactly what you described. Take 11 layers down to one, all that cost, all that complexity, all of that pain, and have one solution that's going to do it all and continuously improve over time, because we're continuing, like I said, we're not just focusing on one aspect of the warehouse. It's that end-to-end supply chain mentality of autonomous logistics and supply chain. So we're going to be able to do that, and so that's the journey. Those are the conversations my team is having now in 2025 that will probably deploy in like 26, 27 timeframes. These are not like, let's sit down over coffee and then tomorrow we're
No.
your contract, right? These are lots of
It takes a
tours.
while to build a freaking warehouse and automate it.
Well, there's that, and then you also have to, we're not talking, somebody that's doing that is got a lot of layers of complexity within their organization, and then you have to go to the capex committee, and you have to have a business case, and you have to have an executive summary, and 19 people all aligned with the same goal and same mission. So they're not easy things, but they're huge in terms of end-to-end supply chain transformation and digitalization conversations, and it is a very new way of doing business, and we're excited about it. Like it's good to hear you, who would have historically been a customer, get excited about it, because I know that what we're doing is on the right path.
I love it. And what's the best way for people to get a hold of you? I'll drop a link to your LinkedIn profile in the show notes, as well as a link to the Nimble website. But if people want to reach out to you and have a conversation about all things supply chain, fulfillment, logistics, warehousing, what's the best way to get a hold of you and have that chat?
Yeah, LinkedIn, as you called out on the front end of this, I'm avid. So if you do hit me up on there, that's great. You can also come through our website, nimble.ai, and there's a contact us form. But reach out, DM me. I'm active. I love networking, right? I believe in the power of the network. I want to give back to people that have given to me, right? So the only way to do that is to continue to make new connections, take your digital life a little bit more off, real life, like we're doing here, even though we're still digitally doing this. But yeah, so if I can talk a little shop, if I can help, if I can strategize, even if it's not something that we're doing, as you mentioned on the front of this, I'm very old, and so I know a lot of people, and if it's not us, I can point you in the direction. So yeah, happy to help and support where I can, and all about the power of the community and stuff like that. So anyway, it was a joy and a pleasure to be on this today, and really just sit down and talk a little shop about what you're seeing and what we're seeing, and hopefully it was as much fun for you as it was for me.
100%. That's why I love having a podcast. I get to talk to people that are experts in areas that I am not. And so not only do I get an education, but my audience gets an education at the same time. I get to form important working relationships in the industry. And I think your net worth is your network at the end of the day. And it's a lot less about what you know than who you know. Still, even with AI, it is still very important about who you know in the industry that can help you and your clients get things done in a fast, effective, efficient way. So I love having these conversations, and I really appreciate your time. Now, as we do come down to the end of our time together, this is where I get to flip the script. I get to hand the microphone over to you. I get to let you ask me one question, any question you like. It could be personal or professional. So Mr. Jonathan Briggs from Nimble, what is your question for me today?
I'm going to take it to Mexico. I'm glad
Love
you
it.
gave me the mic. So how has it been? You're like over a year now in Mexico, like
2 years.
2 years now.
2 years.
So I say this to say I love the food. I gained so much pound. I ate my way through most of Mexico as a teenager. So what is your favorite food that you're eating in Mexico these days?
Look, I love almost all Mexican food, but I am a sucker for birria. I love birria. It's because I
It's
love
a breakfast food.
barbacoa.
Do you eat it in the breakfast?
I usually have it for lunch.
Okay.
It's not. I love a spicy birria with the barbacoa beef and the chili broth. It
Do
is.
you
It
roll the
is.
tortillas? Are you doing that?
Oh
Where
yeah,
you?
oh yeah.
Okay.
I put it in the tortillas as well. I absolutely love it. I love chilaquiles as well, which is a uniquely Mexican thing for breakfast with the beans and the chips and the salsa. I absolutely love it. I love it with pollo. I love it with chicken. And then of course, because I live in Puebla, I love mole. And
You have to.
uh,
Yeah.
mole poblano. It originates in Puebla. Oaxaca claims it a little bit too, but most universally around Mexico, most people think and believe that mole originated in Puebla. And so to get mole negro, mole rojo, mole blanco, it is. It's my wife's favorite Mexican food, mole. And so it was lucky that we ended up in Puebla because that's the one. She's not a massive fan of like all Mexican food because she's Asian, so
Okay.
she prefers Asian cuisine, which I understand. But she does love mole, so we're very very lucky to live in Puebla. So those are my favorites.
That's awesome. Well, I appreciate that. Thanks for letting me have the mic for a minute.
No worries. I mean, of course, I still love tacos. I mean, who doesn't love a street taco? I mean, come on. For all like the 20 pesos, you can get a street taco. So I love that. My wife doesn't do street food because she's got a weak stomach and she easily gets an upset stomach. Me, I got a cast iron stomach, so I can eat street food anywhere, and I do.
Well, I resided in Aguascalientes, and I've eaten at probably every street vendor there is there. Against all of my advice from my host families, do not eat the street food. I've eaten them. And there was a place right there was like a little cart thing that they walked up to. It had a
Oh yeah,
little like they made it was like off the street, and then they had like seating area and stuff like that. But it had tortillas that were as big as my arms could go around, burritos that were like looking at like a 12-inch sub basically when it was rolled up.
yeah,
Now I don't know what it would be then, but back then it was 20 pesos. It was less than $2 for
yeah.
that thing. It was that and a Coke. You're out of there for under $3. Like, and how about Mexico Coke, right? Am I right?
Oh, it's a
Like,
different story, and we get them in glass bottles too.
oh, it's so good. It is so good. So anyway, I digress. I'm glad we got to talk a little Mexico, a little food from Mexico, near and dear to my heart. So, but no, it was awesome being on the show. Love talking shop. Look forward to continuing to banter online as we've done over the last 5 or 6 years. And
You down to Mexico. That's why we bought a 3-bedroom house with a spare bedroom. It's me, my wife, and the dog. So
oh,
you're
that's
gonna come
great.
down to Puebla. We've got a terrace out here that overlooks the city of Puebla. Got a barbecue out there. Got a pergola over the roof. So we're gonna sit out there. We're gonna have some barbecue and some cervezas and have a great time.
Oh man, I might even bring Justin Irvine down with me on
Do
that
it.
too.
Do it. Do it. Bring him down, man. Absolutely. Another famous Kiwi friend.
Yeah.
Doing some really really good work over at the Aggregate Co. And have had him on the pod as well, and knew him from his Seiko Logistics days. So, man,
Small world, isn't it?
when you've been in the industry over 20 years, you meet a hell of a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. So no, it's craziness. Well, again, a pleasure. Glad we got to do this. Hopefully, we do it again sometime in the not too distant future.
I love it. Thank you so much for your time. Can't wait to speak to you again soon, my friend. If you'd like to get mentored by Jason for free, head over to greenwoodconsulting.net, scroll to the bottom of the page, and click Get Mentored by Jason.